A few moments of silence to wait and see if anyone logs in. So hopefully some people will join in. I can see that one or two people are starting to log in now. This is the third time I've done something like this whilst we've been in lockdown, in the hope that I can pass on some information that's worth having to coaches, to clubs, to players. I'd just like to thank everybody that's watched the two previous Facebook Live sessions that I've done. We've had over 3,000 views so far, and most of those aren't mine, so that's a positive, I guess. I share this on Facebook to a couple of coaching groups, Coach to Share and the Canadian Soccer Coaches Network. I also post this on Twitter to people to have a look at on there. And I thought I'd do something a little bit different this week. I asked people whether they wanted another tactical session around formations, or whether people would be more interested in talking about a sort of a club philosophy. So the vote was a resounding success to talk about a club philosophy. What I will say is that in terms of developing a philosophy for a club, there can be a lot of opinion, which is great. If you can hear me, just let me know. I can see one or two people on there. Kev, Maz, Kev Greenwood, Scott, Tom Armstrong. Someone just give me a quick thumbs up to let me know whether you can hear or not, or a thumbs down, or just a quick message, because I might not have set my iPad up right. Anybody? Excellent, thanks Kev. Right, so in terms of developing a club philosophy, I just quickly went onto my phone to get this definition of a philosophy, because I've looked at a couple of different documents today that I've got in my Dropbox. One from the Football Federation of Australia, one from the US soccer coaching curriculum, and there'd be maybe one or two lines that mention philosophy, and then it goes and branches off into playing style. So I thought I'd just look at something that's not football based, and it's just a dictionary definition of philosophy, and then we'll look through the questions that people have asked and take it from there. So if this doesn't last as long as the other two, where I've talked about tactics and I get to play with counters on my lovely tactics table, then that's fine. If it's 20 minutes or half an hour, or if it turns into another hour, then that's all well and good. I don't have a problem with that. So I've got a few questions that I've got written down that people have asked on Facebook and Twitter, and obviously I can just about, even with these dodgy glasses on, see the questions that people are asking me. I don't know if you can see each other's comments on my Twitter feed, or on my Facebook Live feed, or if it just comes up on mine. But I will pick up on any questions that other people ask. I want you to bear in mind a couple of things before I start. That this is just my opinion. That I am no more knowledgeable or less knowledgeable than some of the people that'll tune in here, and will no doubt be able to contribute as we go through. I have my opinions, I have my beliefs, but they're just that. It's just what I think. This is not me speaking as a former FA tutor or as a club coach in England. What I will do, just one other thing that I want to point out before I go and crack on with this. I've had an unbelievable number of new friends requests over the last few days, and I've added most people, but just so that you know, I can't get you a trial anywhere. I am not an agent, and if all you're going to do is send me crap about betting sites or asking me how you can get a trial, you've probably hooked up with the wrong person. So I talk about football, more than happy to share what I know, what I think, what I believe, and over and above that, this for me now is like me chatting to mates. So we'll start off with this. So this is the dictionary definition of philosophy. The study of the fundamental nature of knowledge, reality and existence, especially when considered as an academic discipline. But this is the one that I think will affect us as football coaches. A theory or attitude that acts as a guiding principle for behaviour. So, I might come back to that later on. Philosophy for you, for me, as a football coach, is down to whatever you want it to be. And I'll take a question that I didn't write down because it was asked just before I went and had my lunch earlier on. If your club hasn't got a philosophy, can you implement one? Was the question. I think it's Mwenda who asked me that. To which I replied to him, yeah, if they haven't got one, then you should go and implement one, whether that's through you as an individual coach. But I have a vague understanding of some of the way that club structure is run out in America, which I find completely weird. But that's only because I'm working on this side and mainly with professional clubs. So, welcome from Nepal. So, like I say, this isn't going to be. Hold on to that thought, Pedro, because I may well pick that up. This isn't going to be the definitive version. This is just going to be me asking the questions that I was asked and then expanding on them if people want to throw more questions out on Facebook Live. The first question when I put it out on Sunday morning came from a former colleague of mine called Steve Moss, who I worked with at Rotherham United for a few years. And Steve's question was, should the academy philosophy be the same as the first team? Now, he was coming at this from a pro game perspective, and the answer is depending on which way round you look at building your club. So, should the academy philosophy be the same as the first team? The difficulty that most academies will have, and I'll talk about academy football first, is that you never know how long the first team manager is going to be in position for. So I think the current stats around length of tenure for first team managers outside the Premier League is probably something like 14 months. So if you base your club philosophy, your academy philosophy around your under 12s, 13s, 14s, 15s, 16s, for example, there's a good chance that manager won't be there by the time these kids get anywhere near our first team. So developing a philosophy for me would be better off work the other way around, so it goes from the bottom up and not the top down. The difficulty that at first team level you then get is recruiting a manager who, with lots and lots of different experience as a player, as a coach, as a manager. You're all of a sudden he might have to change his ways to fit the club, and I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. It's potentially a good thing, and it's certainly, I believe, although I haven't done a study visit there as much as I'd like to, that places like Barcelona work from a bottom up and not a top down approach when it comes to putting a philosophy in place. So Barcelona's academy teams don't play like Barcelona's first team. Barcelona's first team play like their academy teams. And Ajax have a similar method where across the club they play a certain formation, a certain style of play, with the emphasis on whatever they want it. And the majority of, certainly up until recently, the majority of Ajax stuff, for example, has been based around the fact that every team that's there plays 4-3-3. So Steve's question, should the academy philosophy be the same as the first team? Yes, if your club's willing to build from bottom to top. If not, and I understand, having worked in the pro game now for nearly 20 years, why it isn't. The first team remit is to win games. The first team's remit is to get promoted, get into Europe, consolidate in the Football League, whatever level your particular club are playing at. So the understanding has to be that you've got to have something that you are aiming for. The academies that I've worked in, we've always had this philosophy, if you like, of we will develop develop across a broad spectrum. So we don't have one fixed playing style. We don't have one fixed set of positions. Over the course of the season, we probably work with anything from 2 to 4, maybe even 5 different formations. The danger is if you go too far the other way and have 5 different formations, for example, is that the kids never get the before they get to grips with one, you're moving on to something else. So it's really important that you give your players something to consolidate, and I think I probably should have said this at the start, but your philosophy isn't based around football or based around your team. It should be based around the player. It needs to be based around the individual player, because that's what ultimately everybody's working to do. Even at the top level, at the pro level, if you can improve all your players, you will improve your team. Our job working with young players is to develop the young player, and by giving them a broad spectrum of experiences and putting them at the centre of everything that you do, then you should have a better chance of getting some success ultimately for your team, but by way of developing all those individuals. So academy philosophy, the closer you get to the first team, the closer that alignment needs to be, because they're closer to going and working with the first team manager rather than working with a new pair of coaches every 12 months, 18 months, 2 years. So that's my thinking around answering that question from Steve. It did get picked up a little bit on Twitter. Some of you might have seen that on Sunday morning, where other people join in, which is great. The next question that I've got came on Twitter from Crunnell1993, and his question was: do you create a philosophy based on players you have, or based around your coaching experience? Well, I've touched on that a little bit with the previous question, in as much as you have got to the whole purpose of us as youth coaches is that we're there for them, they're not there for us. You know, the kids that if those kids didn't come to you, then there'd be no need for you at all. So when they come to you for coaching, they've got to be at the forefront of your thinking. So yeah, you've got to, your philosophy can be broad based, because the other thing with player recruitment, I'm going to come on to that question that Elliot's just asked me there in a minute about length of time and everything else. So going back to the players then, so your philosophy can be designed with your players. You don't have to go and impose this. And I know Maz is watching, and I've worked with Maz before. So she's asked a question which will kind of touch on this a little bit. You can put a philosophy in place with key stakeholders within your club. So that might be, it might come from the chairman, it might come from the secretary, in terms of the more people that can get involved in putting your philosophy together, the greater the buy-in should be. So this is probably more now aimed at the grassroots game. Paul Hockley's just asked me a question. In academy football, it tends to come again from the top down. So the academy manager will speak to the first team manager, will speak to the CEO or the chairman or the chief exec. But at grassroots, you've got a really powerful tool to work with other coaches, to work with your players, get some of your players involved in terms of what they want out of it. It can't be driven by the coach without knowing what your players want. Why are your players there? That's the fundamental bit about coaching. Why are the players there? Do they want to become pros? Do they want to play with their mates? Do they want X, Y, Z? You need to know that from their perspective. That way you can set about creating a philosophy that fits everybody's needs. Will it be based on your coaching experience? This was part of the same question. It will, when you come on to developing a game model or a style of play, because if you've only ever coached one way or only ever played one way, then you'll only have ever experienced one way. It's then down to you to get greater experience so that you can become a more rounded person for yourself. But actually, a lot of the stuff around the philosophy of a club doesn't need to be based around the game model or style of play at all. It can be things, and I'll pick up questions as I go through. It can be based on what is your philosophy as a club on equal game time. So one of the things I always used to challenge when I worked for the FA as a tutor was when people were coming to me and, oh, well, it's about this, it's about that, it's about that. I said, so, well, do you charge your players, do you charge the parents different amounts? You know, if you've got a regular substitute, which in my opinion is wrong, it's just my opinion, do you charge them less per month than you charge the kid who plays 78 minutes out of every 80? If not, why not? Because how are you going to develop that player? Okay, so Dan, I'm kind of talking about that a little bit now, with regards to, does the philosophy originate, where does it originate from? The more people that you can get involved in creating a philosophy for your club, in my opinion, the better. Because like I say, you'll get to see it from a parent's point of view. What do the parents expect? You'll get it from the players' point of view. What do the players expect? What do the coaches expect? What does the club owner, club chairman, club secretary, whatever your different layers of management are? And then once you can sit down and thrash all that out, and get it written down, you can then start to talk about what you can actually physically commit to as a club. You might be able to do A, but you can't do B because of. But at the same time, your philosophy, when you are putting it together from scratch, needs to come from a range of people. And I'll come back to Maz's point later on when I get down to her question. Uh, so I was asked by Adam Clay, how do you develop a philosophy? How do you get buy-in? And how do you align yourself with an existing one? So I've touched on the how to develop one. How do you get buy-in? You'll only get buy-in if people agree to maybe sacrifice, maybe that's too strong a word, but if you're prepared to sacrifice some of what you think you should have uh, for things that you can have, things that you can actually influence. So there has to be a certain amount of compromise, but at the same time, what you might come up with, and this is where having that broader involvement is when you're putting your philosophy together, come up with a list of non-negotiables. So whether that be something like paying subs on time, for example, subscriptions. I'm very aware that there will be people now tuning in from different parts of the world, and if I say anything that you don't understand in terms of the English definition of subs, because it's not substitutes in this occasion, I'm talking about subscriptions. If subs have to be paid on time, that might be a non-negotiable. Your philosophy around game time, so every player is entitled to 50% of every game, or 50% of equal game time over the start of the year, over the course of the year, sorry. They might be your non-negotiables. For me, it's not acceptable at grassroots level, especially where people are paying to play in some cases, certainly in the States, that somebody should never start a game, should always be a substitute, or should never finish a game. Those things are, for me, would be part of the non-negotiables. And you can agree those as a group of people by just having intelligent discussion about what you can and can't manage. If you're, listen, I had this sort of issue, if you like, when I worked as an FA mentor for a couple of years. There will be some teams within clubs that have one philosophy and other teams within the same club that have a completely different one. For me, that doesn't work. This is why I think the club philosophy has to take precedence over any individual coach's philosophy, because how do the kids react when they're moving up, transitioning between teams at the end of each season? But if there's a set of core values that the club has, and a set of principles that the club have around things like equal game time, for example, everybody knows then. So when I move up next year from under 9 to under 10, I'm still going to get 50% of game time. I won't always start every game as a sub. The last part of Adam Clay's question was, how do you align yourself with an existing philosophy? All I would say to that, and we have experienced this in the past with coaches who come into a club with their own, not their own agenda, that's probably too harsh a word, but if you go to a club and you have an interview and you're asked a question about philosophy, these are our ideals, and you don't agree, then don't take the job, because at some point there's going to be a falling out. You will fall out with the club because actually you said something completely different just in order to get your foot in the door, or the club will fall out of you because they can see that you're actually being a bit of a lone wolf, and you're going off and doing different things with your team than everybody else is doing with theirs. If you're a club that wants to win at all costs, win games, win the league and everything else, and you have your best 11 play and your next 3 are sub every week, that is entirely up to you. That's your philosophy. That's the way you work. Nobody can tell you that it's wrong, especially if you win the league every year. But in terms of long-term player development and looking after the best interests of your players, I'll keep coming back to players, then that long-term development won't take place. So, just my thoughts. So if I talk round in circles, just forgive me. I'm just going off the questions. The next question was Maz's, and Maz coaches at the local club here just down the road, where I happen to be an FA mentor for a little while. Another FA mentor's just jumped on, so I'm expecting some kickback now. I didn't enjoy my role as an FA mentor, working with grassroots clubs. I appreciate the job that grassroots clubs do, but the two clubs that I worked with, in one, my local club, which is just down the road, probably 50% of the coaches were interested in developing as a club. The other 50% were just interested in their team for that season, and that was it. The other club, another local club that I was asked to get involved with, had zero interest whatsoever. I don't know why they asked for a mentor in the first place, because I went in, I sat down for 2 hours with all the coaches, some parents, various committee members, explained the role of the FA mentor was to work with them. If you wanted to be a development club, then let's look at the England DNA, which was being rolled out at the time in terms of developing people, developing clubs. But if you want to win a lot of games, then I'll adjust my mentorship to your requirements. So I was there to serve the club, not the other way around. But after that initial meeting, they never got in touch again. Now, my local club, and Maz was one of those progressive coaches who was probably just starting out at the time. She and another group of coaches would turn up regularly. Every time I put a session on, they'd be there, interested, trying to take it back to the club and the teams that they work with. If you don't get that whole club buy-in, it becomes really difficult, because there's no, I touched on it earlier on, there's no continuity, there's no commonality, there's no common ground that people can work from. If the under-9s and the under-10s have got equal game time, if they've got the right policy with regards to kids don't always start games, don't always finish games, sorry, I'm just trying to read another question. Those kids then move up to under, let's say they move out of the foundation phase where they're playing 5, 7, 9 aside, and they stop playing 11 aside football. The first coach they come to at 11 aside is a bit of an aggressive, domineering, command coach who thinks he's got the best 13, 14 players in the area, and all he wants to do is win the league. The kids that have just come up out of the foundation phase, where they're used to being encouraged to stay on the ball, dribble, don't worry about if you lose it, we'll get it back at some other point. Those kids are going to have a real hard time adjusting. And so's the coach, because once you get set in your ways as a coach, it's very difficult to change. It's not impossible, but it can be really difficult. So the kids need that continuity of message. All of a sudden, they were getting equal game time in the foundation phase. Now they've moved up to the youth development phase, so under 13 to under 16, and from getting 50% of the game time, they're getting 5 minutes 1 week. The next week, because the superstar player can't be bothered to turn up, it might well be that he gets 75 minutes. But next week, the superstar player turns up again, and little Johnny's back on the bench and he gets the last 2 minutes when they're winning 3-0, 4-0, 5-0. Probably never gets to touch the ball. You must, I think, like I keep saying, it's my belief, you have to have that continuity of message when it comes to having a club-wide philosophy. It's great if the club just let the under-12s coach have their philosophy. Okay, those players will benefit for a short period of time. But when they move up, and it's a different philosophy within the same club, all that's going to happen is they're going to look to go somewhere else. and you start losing your players. So if you depend on, and again, without fully understanding and appreciating the US North American club system entirely, this is really focused around, not focused around, but it touches on mainly the English side of things, where clubs will go from having a really successful 1 year and winning the league at, say, under 14, to next year's under 14s ending up folding because the players have left because they don't like the coach. Consistency, as I say, of message is really key. Carl Donald asked me, how do you create a philosophy and how do you link it to ILPs? Well, I think I've covered the first bit in terms of how to create a philosophy. Linking it to ILPs. So ILPs are individual learning plans. In the professional academy game, every player has an individual learning plan. It doesn't need to be tied to the club philosophy. An individual learning plan is, how do I get better at this, or how can I continue to work on that, which is something that I'm already good at. So the only way that I would say that tying ILPs into a philosophy is if you're going to have ILPs for your players, then they need to be given the opportunity to practice them, and not just when they're away from the club. So my team, for example, train 4 times a week, and we set aside 30 minutes in one of those sessions for them to work on their ILPs. And their ILPs are agreed, they come from the player, but they're agreed by the coach. So some players will automatically, when you ask them to come up with it, give me 3 strengths and 3 weaknesses that you want to get better at. They will automatically fill in the weaknesses first, because young kids, adolescents, are reluctant to tell you what they're good at, which is fine. So you as a coach then need to help them to get to that point where they're comfortable recognising what they're good at. So again, going back to Carl's question, ILPs can be tied into to anything. They're not part of your game model. They're part of that individual's development, and probably totally separate to the club philosophy, other than the fact that you should allow them the opportunity to practice while you're there. So it's not a case of, right, you just chuck him a ball and he goes dribbling through the cones. As a coach, that's your job, is to supervise that, to have an overview of that. Okay, I'll pick up on Paul's question now. Again, I'm not sure whether you can see each other's questions when you're asking them. Does the more experience you gain as a coach change your philosophy as you're always developing and learning as a coach? Let me see if you can see the rest. I can't. So the more experience you gain as a coach can change your philosophy in a lot of respects, because, like everything, you become better educated, you have a greater understanding. I was talking on another podcast last week, and I was saying that when I first started in academy football, although I was an A-licensed coach, I probably hadn't had a great deal of, because I was still playing until quite old, not as old as I am now, but we were given a bag of balls, some bibs, set of cones. I was given the under-16s group at Rotherham United, and I was just told to get on with it. So there was no syllabus, there was no curriculum. We had nothing at all at that time in regards to specialist fitness training, or with regards to any sort of psychological input. So you then, as a coach, have to develop other skills, or you have to tap into other people who can help you to help the players, coming back to the players again. So yeah, your philosophy is bound to change, I think, as you get older, and as you get wiser and you start to appreciate that it's more than just throwing a ball out to a group of players. For example, when I look back over those first couple of years, I kept all my session plans from my first couple of years when I was at Rotherham United, and when I look back at them, I could see that I had a kind of an unconscious bias towards certain types of coaching sessions. So I then had to change that to make sure that there's no good me releasing a defender, for example, at a critical point in that kid's life if I haven't given him an opportunity to be the best he can be. So if I've done loads of attacking and midfield sessions but no defending sessions, then I release a defender and say it's because his defending's not good enough. Well, they've got every right to turn around to me and say, well, what have you done for me? What, you know, have you haven't worked on with me. You've worked with Joe Bloggs over there, but you've not worked with me, apart from when I was cannon fodder when the forwards were shooting or the midfield players were shooting. So absolutely, experience does change your philosophy. I think it was Paul Hockley there that asked the question earlier on. You have to bear in mind that if I don't pick your questions up, they disappear off my screen. About how often you should review your philosophy. I think that one of the most important meetings in any club should be at the end of the season, when you, not immediately after the last game, a few days after the last game, you need to reflect on what you've done as a club, what you've done as a coach over the course of that year. And that's the time for me when you would be looking to say, you know, this was our philosophy on day one, we're now at day 200, and are we still delivering on day 200 what we said we were going to deliver on day one? So has our philosophy remained consistent across the season, and do we need to change it? So I know that the FA have got these what went well, even better ifs, or plan, do, review. I think that they're really important times. So for me, I would look at it at the end of the season, and if it needs changing, we sit back down with a similar group that we had at the start, and we say, right, does this still work? We've had a bit of feedback about this. Some people don't like this. If we change it, what is the likely outcome? So review it on a seasonal basis. Like I say, that end of season meeting is probably your most important meeting, because everything's already happened. You can't change it, so you can't falsify it. What happened happened, and if you don't reflect and review on that process that you've had in place for the last 200 days, for example, then how are you going to get better next year? What do you need to change as a club? What might you do differently? Do you need to bring more coaches in? So it's important that people keep records. For example, we went from a system with the Football League of having these big A4 books, and you had to fill in every training session in there, every game in there, how many minutes everybody had played. We've now got an electronic system that records that, but I think it's important that all clubs should have that to protect your coaches as much as to protect anybody else. Because if a parent, for example, comes up to you at the end of the season and goes, well, my little boy's only played 25% of the game time, if you've made a record of that, you can go, oh no, there you go, look, he's played 70% or 50%. So those things are important, but certainly look at reviewing on a regular basis. Probably anything more than once a season at the end of the year, at the end of the season rather, is probably too much, because you don't want to keep changing your philosophy just because somebody doesn't like what's happening. You've got to give time for things to blend in. Looking now at This is Scott. I think Scott was on earlier. I don't know if he still is. Scott from Valley Juniors. Does the philosophy cover what you want the team to do and how to facilitate that? And how often would you evaluate? So I've just answered that bit. In terms of, does your philosophy dictate your game model or your style of play? Yeah, it can do, if that's what you want it to do. Your philosophy can, as I said at the start, can be much broader than how we play the game of football. Your philosophy can dictate everything that isn't to do with football if you want, and you can leave it to the individual coaches to decide how they're going to run those teams. For me, that's not what being a club is all about, and I've used this phrase before. There's too many clubs, in my opinion, that are a group of players that all wear the same kit, all wear the same badge, but do everything completely differently, and that's down to coaches. When JB's just jumped on, who I was fortunate enough to work with at a couple of clubs. When I was at York City as the academy manager, we tried to get this grassroots partner club scheme going, and without any pretences, my job was to try and get the best players in the area into my football club at that time. And the idea was we would share with any club that wanted to be involved with us our philosophy, training methods, coaching syllabus, style of play. We would go out and do CPD at the clubs, put on coaching clinics for their staff. And we had about 8 or 10 different coaches turned up to this meeting. Hardly any of them with the full backing of their club to say that if they liked what they heard, they would implement it on a club basis. Individually, they were happy to take that information on board and work with us. Not only would we then get access to their players, their better players who deserved a crack at academy football, but it would also provide a point for us when we were releasing players, knowing that the players that we were letting go would go to a club that still looked after them properly in a way that we considered to be proper, in terms of a coaching structure, in terms of opportunity for game time, etc., etc., all those things. And it never worked because, again, it's just my experience, the whole club wouldn't buy into that particular system. It was great that certain coaches wanted to be involved, but they couldn't honestly take it back to their clubs and say that the whole club were going to roll it out. So to go back to Scott's point, what does it cover? What do you want them to do? For me, if you're going to encompass your playing style into your club philosophy, and like I say, the 2 documents that I've got, I can share on here later. Well, I've got several documents, but the Football Federation Australia one and the US Soccer Coaching Curriculum one, the thing about philosophy is 2-3 lines, and everything else is evolving from that game model, etc., etc. 4 moments in a game: in possession, out of possession, transition to defence, transition to attack. If you can have, in those 4 moments of the game, a little set of bullet points about what your club wants to do. So what are we looking to do when we've got the ball? What are we looking to do when they've got the ball? And what are we looking to do in the 2 transition moments? That will form a really basic philosophy of adding your game model, if you like, to your club philosophy. And that's really, really easy to do. What's not really easy is getting all the coaches within your club to stick to it. So feel free to throw some questions at me and I'll pick them up. I've only got about 3 or 4 more questions that I've got written down that have come in from Facebook and Twitter. So the next one is, I probably can't answer this because I'm not as bright as I purport to be sometimes. What's the difference between an identity and a philosophy? So we've talked for whatever time it is now. Geez, we've talked for nearly 50 minutes on philosophy. In terms of an identity, I guess that's more probably to do with game model and what people recognise as a team's style of play. I don't want to upset any fans of anybody, but you could always. So I'll steer away from the modern teams, if you like, and unless somebody points me back that way. You can always say that the Wimbledon of the mid-80s to early to mid-90s had a clear identity, but I'm not sure that you'd be able to say what their philosophy was, other than have a good time, play football and kick people as hard as you can. Having said that, they had some really good footballers. The likes of Glyn Hodges, Laurie Sanchez, for example, weren't your typical crash bang wallop, what you'd associate with Wimbledon. Once they moved on, they got it's that thing about all of a sudden you change clubs and you become a much better player. Now people get a different perception of what a player is. So the Wimbledon of that era had a clear identity, but did they have a decent philosophy? I'm not sure. I'm actually not sure that a lot of clubs have had any sort of philosophy pretty much outside of the last 10 to 15 years. I think people have just got on with, or been allowed to get on with their own thing. As I said before, 10 teams in a club playing 10 different styles of football. Some of them, so if I just talk about the 11-a-side game, you might have under 13s, 14s, 15s, 16s, 4-4-2, 4-4-2 the diamond, 4-3-3, 3-5-2. That's one club. So you wouldn't be able to say that that club had an identity. They might have a philosophy in terms of game time and everything else, and all the stuff that happens away from the pitch. But have they got an identity? Probably not. This is a really interesting one, and this came from Twitter, a guy called Oliver Gage, who I've engaged with quite a few times. He works in analysis at quite a high level, and I'm sure he'll pick this up on Twitter later on when I post it. Once you've built your philosophy, what do you do to measure it? So, how can you prove that you are what you say you are, that you're doing what you say that you'll do? Whether that is by engaging the parents and using things like questionnaires. So the things that you set out at the start of the season in terms of, right, so this is what we say we're going to do. You use those same points at some point, maybe even the midpoint of the season, but definitely at the end of the season, and ask those same people, right, how did we do with equal game time, transporting players to games, making sure that people start regularly and don't always start as substitutes. By asking those same questions at the end, middle and end, that you did at the beginning, you will hopefully get an indication, a real simple measure of whether you've stuck to your philosophy or not. In terms of game style, game model, if you say that you're going to play out from the back, then how do you measure it? Some of how you play out from the back might be dictated by how the opposition play against you. So I guess the best way to gauge that would be to film your games and look at specific aspects of your game over a period of time. So, how many times did you look to play out of the back with short passing? Now, if you look to play out of the back through short passing when it's not on, you would have to question either the decision making of your players or the direction of the coach in terms of the coach's understanding of the game, because it's not always on to do that. And I mentioned this when I did the tactical talk last week. You can't be afraid to change your game plan mid-game if things need changing. That's what being a coach is about. That's what you're there for. Coaching is coaching. So I think that you do have to be adaptable, but there are different ways that you can measure the success of what you do, and whether you are sticking to your guns and prepared to be questioned and challenged on it. I mention parents a lot of time. A lot of people with academy football have varying opinions on how much involvement you should have with parents. Well, if you treat them wrong, they're your worst enemy, but if you treat them right, they're your best friend, in terms of they're the ones who spend, you might have your players for grassroots level, let's say you have them for 3 hours a week plus a game. Well, the other 120 hours, whatever it is, they're with the parents. So if you get your parents on side and your parents are prepared to buy into what you say you're going to do, regardless, this is the first time I've mentioned it, regardless of results, they can see what you're trying to achieve to make their children better players, then you should go some way to being able to see how successful your program is. Okay, I've only got one more question left, so if anybody's got any questions, bang them on the bottom now and I'll try and pick them up before the dog starts scratching at the door and wanting a 3 o'clock walk. It was from someone on Twitter called FC_RTB. How do you bring your philosophy to life so it's not just a piece of paper? I think that this is one where having experienced coaches around you and using the people who put the philosophy in place in the first place, not coaching teams, so that they can step back and really give you as a coach some really valuable, important feedback. If someone's going to ask you, are you implementing our philosophy? You've got a very narrow focus, because you're concentrating on coaching the players, you're concentrating on organising the games maybe, and you're concentrating on dealing with whatever happens within the course of a match. You need somebody else to look through a different set of eyes at what you're doing, and they need to know what that philosophy is and was. So what did we say we were going to do? What did we say we were going to do in terms of kit, for example? So we play some games every now and against a development centre team, and when that team turns up to play us, they are always, these are just young grassroots kids coming from a development centre. They always turn up on a bus. They always turn up and every kid's got a shirt and tie on. They always, as a group, give the coach of the opposition team, so me, a bunch of flowers. Now, that's them bringing their philosophy to life. Whatever your thoughts are on that, that is them living out and delivering on what they say that they're going to do. So I guess that's how you bring it to life. You've got to believe in it in the first place. So as I said right at the beginning, the more people that you can get involved initially in setting up a philosophy thrashing it out, arguing it out, weighing up the pros and cons of why you can do that but you can't do that, and then get it down on paper. This is our philosophy, and display it. Give it out to all the parents, stick it up on a changing room wall, send it out to all the players via Hegia or WhatsApp or whatever communication tool that you use, and see where that takes you. I'm going to try and pick up a question that Dave Smith had. Dave, if you're there, just ask that question that you asked before, please, and then we'll wrap it up. I'm just trying to, because I can't see on my iPad the questions once they've gone. No, I can't find it. So, one of the things that's interesting me about doing these things over the last couple of weeks is where everyone's from. So when you've watched, if I know you and I know where you are, then you don't need to tell me. So Joe Blank is out in the sandbox, Lee Squires is out in America, Adam Girdham's just down the road, Tim Waring's in Northern Ireland. If you're watching this for the first time or we've just hooked up on Facebook, then here we go, Dave. So, I appreciate things will differ depending on level of football. Who do you think is the most important person in the... If the next word is club, in fact, regardless of whether the next person, whether it says the next person in the club, the most important player in all of this, there's my answer. The most important person in all of this is the player. Whatever level you're playing at. I said at the start, they're not there for you to get better as a coach. You are there for them. You are there to support the player in their development. So it's not the secretary, it's not the coach, it's not the chairman, it's not the owner. It's at our level, it's the player. Now I know that if you get involved in a professional game and if you were asking this question to first team staff, for example, they say it's the fans, the fans own the club. That's probably right at that level. The fans don't own the club, unfortunately, anymore. Very rarely do the fans own the club. The German model, if you like, of ownership, where people can't, where clubs can't sell more than 51%, I think it is, to consortiums, mean that there is a greater deal of club ownership. Spain, with the socio thing, where the clubs are owned by millions and hundreds of thousands of fans, is different. Excuse me. At certainly at League One and League Two level over here, the fans are important because if they don't they don't get the multi-billion-pound TV rights money. They get a really insignificant amount of money from TV. So at League One, League Two, conference, non-league, they really need the fans coming in through the gates, because they don't exist. We've seen clubs even in the local area go to the wall, and unfortunately it might happen to a few more off the back of what's going on at the moment. But North Ferriby had a massively successful run to the FA Trophy final, and then within I think 2 or 3 seasons they disappeared. Although my understanding is I think that they have resurfaced this year, so fair play to them. But yeah, everything has to revolve around the player. Without the player, you don't need coaches. Some would argue you don't need coaches anyway. So I think that I've picked up everyone's questions. If anybody's got any more questions, then by all means add them to the bottom of this, and I'll pick them up and answer them. I'll probably drop a couple of documents on here from out of my Dropbox that people can have a look at, and then people can make suggestions about what they want to see next. So I'm finding it quite cathartic without having regular football. Like I say, it's just my opinion. It's me talking crap to my iPad. But if people don't ask questions, then they become really short conversations. But it's amazing to me how quickly the last hour's gone. As I said, I will continue to add people that ask me, that send me friends requests, apart from the obvious ones who are just going to ask me if they can have a trial or if I can give them a club. So if there's any other topics that anybody wants me to pick up over the next couple of weeks while we're likely to still be in lockdown, if you want to see these more often, I've been doing them once a week. This is only the third one. Some people are probably sick of hearing me, but this will stay up on Facebook. I'll post it to the Coach to Share group. I'll post it to the Canadian Soccer Coaches Network group, and I'll post it on Twitter. So any feedback is welcome, even the abusive stuff, which usually my work colleagues send me, not always privately, but hey ho. Stay safe, and I will catch up with you in a few days, or maybe this time next week. Cheers everyone.